Why did your last relationship not work out? Story 1. I'm a foster girlfriend. I get them ready for their next girlfriend, who they end up marrying. Seriously, it's happened multiple times. The explanation for every breakup is the wrong person at the wrong time. Never had big fights or anything. Things just get difficult with life, and they decide they would rather work through it single versus together. Answer: thank you for adding to my vocabulary. I'm a foster boyfriend. At least I was back before I got married. I have a string of women that immediately got married right after me. One girl dumped me at a party, randomly picked a guy in the band and married him, and called her shot when she did it. How about that guy? He looks like he's ready to get married. Hold my drink. Boom. She was right. Story 2. Massive avoidant attachment issues. He rarely followed through on his commitments, big or small. He was secretive and masked it as being quiet or independent, and ultimately needed a lot of reassurance and validation, secretly, from other women all of the time. I could have been the juiciest peach in the orchard, but his ego needed the fruit platter. Answer: I got told constantly I overthought everything, then caught him being dishonest. Not the first time. And his response was, well, I was thinking you'd do something first. I'm not sure I ever want a relationship again. BC, I don't want to owe anyone anything. And you're great, thanks for trying. A nice, immature, and avoidant reaction to really knock a girl down. Story 3. Lack of intimacy chemistry, which sucks because we would probably be married now if we did. Edit: she called while I was typing this. Weird. Edit 2. Sorry guys, but no, we aren't getting back together. We are just friends now, and she called to ask about the filters on a water purifier that I gave her when we stopped living together. Story 4. No idea. Everything was good. We were mid-sexy times, something we had done hundreds of times. She all of a sudden had a panic attack while we were switching positions. We stopped, of course. She stayed the night, hung out with me one more time. We just had food and watched a movie. No physical contact. 2 days later, she needed it over text. Story 5. He was lazy and had zero work ethic, lol. Was comfortable being complacent in a dead-end, low-paying job rather than go to college or even learn some sort of skill in elevating his career or earning more income because he has wealthy parents, both of whom came from poor families and worked their jerk off to get to where they are. He can fall back on, while simultaneously expecting me to be a SAHM and trad wife. Played video games for 12 hours a day on his off days from work. Spent every paycheck after bills were paid on action figures, collectibles, and Pokemon cards, yet constantly whined about being broke. Eventually, I discovered he was cheating on me with a supervisor at his job, as well as talking to women online for almost our entire relationship. He'd given me an STD that I still suffer from problems from to this day. Had started emotionally abusing me so he could give himself a reason to dislike me so that his affair would be justified in his mind. Answer: how many are there men like this? Seriously, I have almost exactly the same story, only my doesn't have rich parents, but by some twisted fate got close to an old 90 lonely lady who pays him quite a lot basically to go buy her groceries 2-3 times a week, for which he constantly complains. No ambition or drive in life, lays in bed all day and watches TV and plays games on his phone, spends money on poker and gambling, has ridiculous dreams that he will get rich one day with no effort because he doesn't want to serve any other man. Had women texting him all the time, which I never questioned since I trusted him blindly. I brought it up after he accused me of messing with him. I wasn't. I was texting my sister who never liked him and didn't want him to see that. And he coldly said, women text me all the time. What should I do? Said those are his friends, even though he doesn't believe in male-female friendships, which he openly stated. Soon after that, my sister, whose husband works at the same place as the guy, said to me they saw him flirting with some women there, most probably his female boss, whom I thought was 50. And yes, instead of breaking up as an adult, he did the same thing your ex did, until he pushed me to my limits and now describes me as crazy, needy, and obsessed. Oh, and yes, since I started seeing him, I have been getting yeast infections every single month. Luckily, no other problem. Story 6. You have to ask her. She ghosted me mid-conversation. I was on my way to pick her up from the airport. Everything is fine. We were together for 5 years. She told me what gate she was at, and I pulled up. I'm waiting and never got a reply to my calls or texts. I waited for 3 hours and then went home confident she would call and give some reasonable excuse. Never heard from her again. She blocked my number too. I would see her friends and ask, but they were vague. A few months later, I met someone else, and we dated for a few years and got married last spring. I don't have social media, but about 2 months into us dating, my wife came to me and asked, do you know who this? It was my ex following her on IG. She would watch all my wife's stories but never commented. After we were married, my wife posted a picture of our rings with the caption, Mr. Mrs. my last name, and my ex immediately unfollowed her and blocked her. Story 7. When I told him I write erotica, he ghosted me. Slowly at first, but after a week, no signs of life. He did say that he could never face telling his parents that he was with someone who wrote smut. I mean, that is just a hobby. I'm also an engineer, but whatever. Dumped by a mother-in-law I'd never met. Nice. Story 8. We had just celebrated 3 years and everything was fine. Nothing out of the ordinary. One night she texted me, I think we should break up, and blocked me. Never heard from or saw her again. I contemplated driving to her house, but I didn't want to end up in a situation. I've been with someone else for 11 years now and married for 6, but I'm still a bit traumatized from this and occasionally think about it. Story 9. Miscommunication from both sides resulted in fears. All we needed was a heart-to-heart conversation about everything, and it would have been resolved. Sadly, we were going through such an overwhelming period of our lives that neither of us had the capacity to understand the other or have the conversation. If we ever get the chance to speak again, at least I know what we can do differently. For now, we're in no contact. Her fears got the best of her. Story 10. He grew up in a broken home and faked being normal. Later realized he was a dismissive avoidant, which explained why I had to carry the entire mental load. All I asked for was love. And every time I'd ask, I would get told I'm being needy or clingy because spending 1 hour a day watching TV while he scrolled on his phone was too much time for him. After 15 years of being expected to do everything and yet being put in last place on his list of priorities, I decided I needed someone who actually knows how to show love versus someone who only says they love you but forget your birthday anniversary, etc. I tried really hard to make it work, but I was literally eliminate myself trying to save a 21-year marriage. And sacrificing everything to do so isn't going to work if the other party isn't actually invested in the relationship. So I decided to walk away. I still feel like I failed, even though I know he's never going to change back into the man I fell in love with. Maybe I was blind in love and fooled. Now I think that man was never real to start with. Story 11. 3-year LDR. He hit himself during arguments and blamed it on me pushing him to that point. He would scream at the top of his lungs and not allow me to leave the call, even though I was afraid or I was told I was abandoning him. It got more intense over time until I finally ripped the Band-Aid off and left. 5 months later, my life and relationships have blossomed in ways I never could have imagined before. I'm happier than I've ever been. Every day I'm proud of myself for making the right choice. Story 12. Turns out that I was just his side piece for 6 months. I didn't know he was engaged to a woman that he's been with for 19 years. He got mad at me for telling her about his infidelity as soon as I figured out who she was. He also got mad at me for calling him out on a bunch of other lies he fed me. Burn in hell, David, you reap what you sow. Story 13. He was talking to multiple of his exes behind my back since day one, unbeknownst to me, and decided that getting his male body part wet in another man was more important than our entire 2.5-year relationship. That's okay. He got arrested for possession and driving while intoxicated, went to jail for a bit, lost his license for a while, and is going to be on probation and sober LMAO for a hot minute. He did me a huge favor by walking out on me, the POs. Story 14. It was sad. My ex-wife always thought I was against her somehow, despite trying to do everything I could to help her succeed. It was exhausting trying to be a decent person and always being thought of as some monster if I made a simple mistake or accused of lying if I was mistaken. At this point, I hope she continues to believe that I was against her rather than realize that I cared for her deeply. Story 15. Extremely incompatible. Met because we were neighbors at the same budding fate, just moved to city. Everything is kind of new. We weren't living together, but in a way it was a lot similar because I can just walk a couple of stairs to her place. Also, there was a lot of emotional things incompatible, and intimacy didn't work out really. Story 16. Growing apart. Got together in early 20s. Until we broke up 8 years later, we started to resent each other. Also, he was more a friend turned boyfriend, so the chemistry was never 100. Other red flags was that I constantly kept having feelings for other people. Lessons learned. We're both now with partners more suitable to who we are now. And even though it got ugly at times, I'm happy for both of us. Story 17. Dead bedroom. I was just being rejected every single time. I never felt so unwanted and repulsive. Tried talking about it so many times, and it got us nowhere. Once we're at the point where we need to have a conversation about it, the mood is gone. The point of the talk was to try to figure out the problem, not to stress how much this was hurting to the point where she felt inclined to throw me a pity fudge to keep me from leaving her. No thanks. Turns out I'm not repulsive, though, or at least I'm not repulsive to the most amazing woman I've ever been with. Someone very special really wants me. Might sound weird coming from a guy, but I've never felt so sexy and desired as I do now, and it feels really good. We're coming up on 6 years together, and I'm going to ask her to marry me. Almost 6 years and never had an argument. She's so perfect for me, and I think I'm perfect for her. Life is good since that last relationship ended. Story 18. We were both 16 and wanted different things out of the relationship. I wanted a friend to hang out with and, if she was willing, make out and stuff. She wanted to be in the cool kids club. Quickly realized I wasn't a member of the cool kids club and ditched me for Greg, or Tom. I don't remember the guy's name. He also got dumped by her after a few weeks, so I guess he wasn't what she was looking for either. Story 19. Timing and distance. We ended things on good terms, but man, it hurt. Neither of us wanted to end the relationship, but her work required her to move overseas while my work requires me to stay where I'm at. We talked seriously about one of us making the career sacrifice, but it wouldn't be fair. We also talked about going LDR, but this was likely a permanent move for her, so there's no way we'd manage a committed relationship traveling halfway across the world. Story 20. We had been seeing each other for 3 to 4 months. I was only seeing her. I've always been a one partner at a time type of person and kind of assumed we were exclusive at this point after the first 2-3 months. We were hanging out one night at her place and her phone kept blowing up. I looked over and it was a bunch of messages from some guy on Hinge. I asked her about it and she said she was still talking to other people on there because it was fun. I wasn't a fan of that, but instead of communicating how that made me feel and that I thought we were exclusive, I shut down. It soured our relationship and led to a general tension whenever we saw each other, and we broke up 2 weeks later. This was 7 years ago, and thankfully I've grown a lot since then. But long story short, we broke up because I was young, 25, and not good at communicating my feelings in a respectful manner. Story 21. She saw me out in the afternoon with a guy she'd never seen before after I'd told her I was going to be at work all day. She decided I must be cheating on her and went off. Told all our mutual friends I was cheating. Told everyone she should have known better than to trust a bisexual not to fudge around. The guy was my older brother. He'd flown into town last minute for a work thing, so I'd finished early to go catch up before his same-day flight home. Story 22. Dude was extremely persistent, love-bombed me, made me feel absolutely beautiful and wanted. Then the moment he had me, he withdrew himself emotionally and dealt with his divorce and child. It lasted 5 years because I constantly tried to convince myself that I could just love him enough to make it work. It did not. My emotions were very one-sided. It's been a year. I'm much happier and discovering myself again. I will admit this experience has turned me off from future relationships. Story 23. She liked to party too much, and with the type of people whose only life goal at the time was to see how fudge up they could get. And to make matters worse, I would hear about all stories about how trashed she would get. I'm sure other things happened. I couldn't handle that degree of degeneracy. If she wasn't as attractive as she was, I would have ended it much sooner. Story 24. The second I realized the guy I'm dating is starting to want kid sits done, I'm very clear on this when I first meet someone. My past exes thought I would change my mind as the relationship became stronger. My last BF broke down crying one night saying he really wanted to be a dad and was wondering if I would ever consider it. I immediately packed my things that night and disappeared without another word. This has happened 4 times, and after a decade of dating, I have no patience for it. Story 25. Partner jokingly roasts me. Hey, that kind of hurt. Are you actually mad about these things? Partner gets upset that I can't take a joke and blames me for making him feel bad. Dodges question of, he actually doesn't like these things about me. Happens again, but this time I don't say anything. Partner, why are you so miserable? Explains things he does that feel hurtful. Partner, you make me feel so guilty. Why can't you just be carefree? Me trying to be carefree. He ended up dumping me. But my God, I feel so much better. 2 years later, and apparently he's still mad at me for something because he saw me in public a couple months ago. He stormed up to me looking all mad and his friends shoot him off. So accountability? Story 26. When I went for a late afternoon nap and smelled on my pillow a cologne I did not use, and then found a tied-off condom in the washroom trash basket. Who does that instead of flushing it? I might have forgiven her for screwing her coworker in our marriage bed, Had she confessed, apologized, and showed true contrition? But she tried to brazen it out and adamantly denied anything ever happened. That obtuse denial and willful lying caused me to also call the senior partner at her law firm, herself the recent victim of infidelity, and advise that two of her married junior partners were having an extramarital affair. They were both promptly terminated. My ex couldn't find another job for more than a year and basically blew her half of the equity from the house we sold. Story 27. I felt like they were just waiting for me to break up with them so they didn't have to do it themselves. They never really wanted to talk, never asked about my day, never wanted to do anything but go out with their friends or watch TV. I tried to talk about issues with them, and they'd shrug it off. I ended up preferring being by myself. Story 28. We got along well enough, but there just wasn't any excitement to it. We didn't quite click somehow. Went back to being friends instead. I wondered if I was being too particular at the time, but I eventually met my husband, and he makes me feel like an excited golden retriever every day, so I'm glad I listened to that instinct. Story 29. I ran out of energy to maintain it. It was hard work, constant reassurance, guilt for wanting to spend time alone, guilt for wanting to spend time with friends. For all the housework I did, it was never enough. Well, nothing I did was ever enough, really. Story 30. The last relationship that didn't work, different long-term life goals. I am child-free and I am not into marriage, living together, etc. Not into hookups, own nightstands either, BTW. Sure enough, all my dates knew that since the very beginning. But even if they are okay with that initially, they more often than not start feeling they need more, and I fully understand that. So yeah, the last relationship that just ended, mostly. I moved countries once again. She stayed. It was a 6-year-long FWB thing that evolved into something more serious, still without co-living or any further plans. We are still friends, but I want her to move on. Story 31. She didn't like that I had female coworker friends and associates and decided to just cut me off without warning. It's extremely unfair. Here's the kicker. The female coworker friends that I have are all married women. They don't even view me in that kind of way, but she's got her head so far up her own jerk to see that. Story 32. 12 years married, poor communication, unearthed unresolved childhood trauma from her youth, dead bedroom and lack of physical touching, misunderstood priorities. As the father of 3 youngsters, together I put the kids first and they were my hobby. She thought she should be put first. Life's general stresses, not establishing boundaries and expectations earlier, marriage therapy failure. Story 33. Geopolitics. We were perfect for each other until we weren't, but we were doing long distance and hoping I'd move to her country. Sadly, she lives in the U.S. and I'm in India. I cannot begin to describe how impossible the new admin has made it for me to try to move there legally. It would literally be easier to move to North Korea for me as an Indian. Also, massive racism against Indians the world over off late. The distance looked like the gap was impossible to bridge, so she broke up with me. I was willing to move elsewhere to set up a situation for her, but she wasn't willing and things had long since started to fizzle out from her end. To the point where after we broke up, we stayed in touch because we've been friends for a decade. It felt like literally nothing has changed for me. Now that I'm not head over heels for her anymore, the red flags she's dropped have become more apparent to me. Still reeling and trying to let go of her. It's been a rough couple of months. Story 34. I mean, the main thing was we were at different stages of life. She wanted kids within a couple years, and I didn't. But the catalyst toward those real conversations was me bringing up the fact that I felt unheard in our relationship, and I felt as if she didn't really listen to what I was saying when we would talk. She later admitted to ignoring me sometimes. So I was right. Story 35. She had multiple severe mental health issues and made little effort to manage them herself. I basically became like a parent to her, and I grew to resent that. And I think she resented that dynamic too. Towards the end, she was just miserable and rotting at home, getting high all day, every day, while simultaneously complaining to me that she was isolated and alone. I tried to help her make friends and get her involved in volunteering or employment, but by that time, I think she'd given up on the relationship and given up on our life together. She went to visit Vegas and never came back, and while I mourned the end of the relationship and everything I had invested in it, ultimately I was glad she was gone. I also found out she had had an online affair with someone who I thought was a friend pretty early into our relationship. She had lied to me for our entire 5 years together, saying I was paranoid and controlling for being suspicious. Once I learned of that betrayal, I felt relief that the relationship was over and total justification for refusing her when she asked to try and fix things sometime later. If I could do it again, I wouldn't. I've had other relationships that didn't work out, but I was still glad for the time together. But this was not one of them. We had some fun times in the beginning of our relationship, but ultimately we just ended up hurting each other. Story 36. We were heading in different directions and had different outlooks on life. Wasn't anyone's fault, and we loved each other. It was just never going to work out. After 3 years, so we mutually agreed that breaking up was best for both our futures. It sucks, but that's life. We're still good friends. She found and married a guy that was more right for her as I found my wife and partner, and it's been perfect. So we're happy for each other. Story 37. Honestly, my last one was one of the more amicable splits I've had in my dating life. She thought she was demisexual, but turns out she's full ace, and we both knew that it wasn't going to work out. I didn't want her to change who she was to fit with me, and she didn't want me to change to fit with her, so we agreed to call it quits before it became messy, complicated to decouple. Story 38. We were in love, but we wanted completely different things from life. Every conversation about the future turned into frustration or sadness. Eventually, I realized that no matter how much we cared, we were on paths that would never meet, and staying together only made both of us unhappy. Story 39. She preferred the beds of her ex-girlfriend, 2 women she cheated on her ex-girlfriend with, and a woman I worked with. I guess she just loves the attention of being wanted. She's apparently back in a relationship with her ex, but they keep breaking up and getting back together from what I've been told. I've now stopped speaking to the people who give me updates as I've asked them not to, and they still did. I was unaware of said cheating on ex-girlfriend, as I would never have entertained in the first place if I knew. Story 40. Mental illness, I think. He is bipolar and has PTSD from his time as a soldier. I don't fault him for any of it, but it made things difficult. Worse when he didn't take his medication, which was often. He actually was the one who broke it off, saying I'd be better off without him. I resented the fudge out of him for that, but it turns out he was right. I didn't realize how much of my energy was spent trying to keep him whole. I have met the most wonderful man, and we are happily building a life that we love. I hope my ex has gotten the help he deserves and that he's well. Story 41. I was depressed and essentially refused to make any positive changes in my life or take responsibility for this. Edit. It is wild to me how uniformly the other comments locate the issue in the other person, or to some nebulous concept like poor communication that isn't attributed to any particular person. Story 42. She told me that her divorce wasn't actually final after leading me to believe it was during our first month of dating. I already bought that t-shirt and earned a boatload of trauma from the first time a woman, my now ex-wife, said that to me. Learned from that mistake and applied that knowledge to shut it down early. Story 43. He passed away. If he were still here, we would still be together. I miss him every day, but I think I've done a good job of picking up the pieces since he passed. I've gotten clean sober. I finally left my shoot hole of a hometown, and I actually managed to find love again. Hell always hold a chunk of my heart, but life must go on. The pain never goes away, but time does ease it some. I love you, Arthur Lee, forever and always. Story 44. I was miserably unhappy, still deep in denial about being transgender, and afraid to break up with him for fear that I'd never find anyone else who could love me for who I really am, even after living with a dead bedroom for several years because his fragile masculinity felt too threatened by the idea of needing to use toys to please his partner due to me being one of those unlucky people for whom only putting a male body part in my female body part just isn't enough stimulation to make me climax. It took 18 years for me to find another boyfriend, but I finally did. And he's an adorable guy, also trans, who's even more kinky than I am. Story 45. Wouldn't keep our personal conversations to herself and would add what I said behind closed doors into the open conversations at the time during parties, family events, which just rubbed me the wrong way. I spoke and communicated that to her, and she still kept it up. Plus, when we were dating, my roommates and I were clearly cleaning the apartment. What is my ex doing? Sitting on the couch, plucking the loose hair from her head and just throwing it on the apartment floor. Granted, she was a good person, wonderful individual who had dreams and accepted me for who I was, even with my HPV. But that was 22. Been 3 years ago, honestly. Dating game has been a one-sided street for a while, and it sucks. Story 46. She had anger management issues. I told her I loved her and that she could heal with me, that we could work through it together. But over time, it started eating me alive. She would scream at me, even when the problem wasn't about us. I grew up in a home where there was a lot of shouting and fighting, and I realized I couldn't go through that again. It was heartbreaking, but I just couldn't be in a relationship that feels the same as what once terrified me growing up. Story 47. Due to a bad time previous to me, they were very mistrustful, developed a drinking problem, and I was accused of being out to get his house. Had to leave because it became so draining to try and get them to believe I wasn't like their ex-partner. Really sad and shows how baggage really needs to be unpacked before you get into another relationship. Story 48. 13-year age gap. I was 17 when I met him. Didn't work, didn't help me cook or clean or shop, had ED. So I went without intimacy for long enough to forget what it felt like. And by the end, he would not look after his own health. He started getting really angry. It was fear that finally gave me the courage to leave. Please don't judge me for staying so long. I'm a soft shite who is terrified of conflict, and I fully believe he groomed me. Story 49. He had a whole affair for years with his first wife, deserted our 2 girls and I in a new state. I was a stay-at-home mom. He would stand at the ATM as his paycheck was deposited to remove it and leave 40 for groceries. In hindsight, best thing to ever happen. Story 50. I could write a book or just publish my journal I wrote after separating. Alcoholism, emotional manipulation, physical abuse, open relationship, wrestled a gun out of his hands. He gave me separation paperwork on Christmas morning that would make me lose all inherent rights I had as a wife in cause of divorce, because that's what you wanted, isn't it? Calling me all sorts of fun names and also trying to prevent me from visiting family and friends, but also crying, "I'm not your prison guard," when you tell him where you are, for him to act like an abandoned, angry child crying in the dark when you get home after having fun with people he didn't want to hang out with. Let me tell you, if you have never sat in front of your parents and unloaded a decade of trauma on New Year's Eve because you feel the need to explain your reason for wanting to divorce. Story 51. After 5 years, we agreed we loved each other, but there were things we weren't getting from the relationship that were important to us. Post-relationship, we attempted briefly to maintain a friendship, but it wasn't feasible. The relationship was the only remaining tie we had. I still very much hope she's doing well, and the personal growth she has during our time together has only grown stronger. But I'm happier now than I could have ever imagined being with her. Story 52. I think we just don't know how to be with each other. There is love and affection, but it seems like there's an invisible wall of different heights according to who's facing it. And all we can do is wave goodbye at each other and cry it out. I really loved her, and the world feels empty and dull without her around. Story 53. Couple reasons. First, she gave me an ultimatum. I had been playing in a Wednesday night pool league with my buddies for about 10 years, and she said couldn't play anymore. Kicker, she went to school Wednesday nights, and since she lived about an hour away, she never saw me anyway. Second reason is it would have ended eventually because I suck. Story 54. He wasn't ready for commitment, I don't think, or just wasn't emotionally mature or ready for stuff that comes with a relationship. He broke up with me 3 days after my dad passed away over text. It was also a few days before my birthday, so double ouch. It hurt more that I gave him an out when my dad got unwell and hospitalized, but we move and we grow from it. Story 55. He lied about the things he liked, his personality, and his past to get close to me and use me for intimacy and money. He was also a cheater, just like the one before and the one before that. I wish I knew what was wrong with me, why I attract these types. I always try to go for guys who seem much different than the last, but I'm always finding shootout when they flip. You know, that part when start to fall in love, start to trust them completely, and start bragging about them to your friends, then suddenly their whole personality changes and everything you do pisses them off? Yeah. Story 56. We both wanted different things. I was a city mouse living in the country. I dislike every second. I'm also a liberal, and he was very conservative. Not a match. I left the relationship right after Thanksgiving, 13 years ago. I moved 1,600 miles away in a larger area along the East Coast. We both have since gotten remarried, but we are cordial towards each other for the sake of his child who sees me as his mom. Story 57. They cheated, and I found out that pretty much every single life story they'd ever told me was a lie. One of my favorites she told me was that she was captain of her softball team in HS. Nope, didn't even play on the team. I found her yearbook when packing up her stuff. I asked a friend of hers about it afterwards, and they laughed and said she never even played. Story 58. He decided all of a sudden that being in a relationship felt too restrictive for him, even though he claimed that he loves me still. I felt like he was purposely being vague and very confusing. The more I tried to delicately communicate in various ways about the delicate topics, the more he distanced, emotionally BC, I was being too intense, or wait, no, what was the phrase he used? Wasn't passing the vibe check, LMFAO. So I got to the point where I had to respect myself more. I had to choose myself. I am still deeply sad about it because the chemistry we had was amazing. The bond that we shared was amazing. Everything else was fantastic. But for me, trust is paramount, and you can't build a future with someone who doesn't want to build a future with you. And I'm sure as heck not going to force myself on anyone. So it sucks, but yeah, total bummer. Story 59. This is going to be a little complicated, so hang tight. Last year, my plan for the week of Valentine's was to go to Durham, where my ex lives, and spend multiple days with him. I couldn't make it the full week due to some unrelated car problems, but I got there and he was delighted to see me. We watched live action One Piece. Fun times had all around. The Saturday morning I was there, he told me after breakfast that he wanted to talk. The night before he'd heard me say the word motherfucker under my breath about something. I don't remember what I said it about, but to him I was shoot-talking his friends he'd been on a Discord call with. He said it was a side of me he didn't know about, and that if I could be like that about his friends, I could very well be like that to him one day. Of course, that was a ridiculous claim. We'd been dating for nearly 10 years at that point. He knew me and knew that I don't ever want to hurt anyone because they're nerdy or kinky or whatever else. But that hasn't left the back of my head since. I had thoughts the first 2 days along the lines of, I almost wish B was like a pod person or something, because that would be easier to deal with than acknowledging how badly I screwed up with this. Name removed for privacy concerns. To his credit, he didn't raise his voice at me during the discussion. His logic for cutting me off made sense in a vacuum. And I personally appreciated him helping me pack up all the stuff I'd left at his apartment. Everyone I told about getting dumped thought B was either immature or a coward for using that as his reason. I suspect there had been other things piling up before, and he just latched on to the overheard obscenity as the immediate cause. I sent him a letter working out some of my thoughts, and then for his birthday that year, a voice recording of me explaining that I absolutely did not say that word in connection to his friends, and was sorry that I hurt him. Can we still talk? Sometimes cause you said we could be friends. We haven't talked in months. I know he's still alive because I see his account on Tumblr and Steam, but I don't want to reach out for fear of getting blocked or shot down. If you're reading this, B, I hope you're doing well and you still get to work in the sciences. Story 60. Well, she came to me and told me she made out with another dude at the bar. I think she was trying to see if I would fight for her. I just reacted with, oh, so we're done now. Thanks for telling me before we got too deep into it. If I can't trust you, we're done. I have the password to my wife's phone. She has mine. I don't look, and neither does she, at least that I know of, because there is trust there. Story 61. He dumped me right before he got out of prison. Was pretty savage about it, too. He's still figuring himself out, and I wish every day that I could hold him and witness his growth. I imagine he will always be skittish, same as he is always beautiful. Story 62. Because I was in jerk. I forced myself into a relationship when in reality, I really wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. I learned too late that it wasn't going to work and dragged it on for way too long. She was a great woman. She didn't deserve what I put her through. And now I will live with this every day. Story 63. He lived too far away. It was pretty tiring. I also had a feeling he was planning to move out of the country because he bought a flat. So I kind of viewed it as a stopgap. 8 months. One before that, he lived too far away and think he lied about being an alcoholic. He yelled at me for saying we should do a paint and pour thing, which was really fun. Only 2 guys got tipsy, 1 year-ish. Story 64. Incompatibility. We were on different healing paths. We couldn't provide what we wanted from each other anymore. My growth limited theirs and vice versa. They had religious trauma and wanted to explore more self-expression in their own identity. I was uncovering my own trauma from my family. Essentially, I didn't know how to set up boundaries and worked myself to bare bones to keep everyone happy. So while I was trying to speak up for myself more and setting boundaries, it was all too much for my ex. My therapist described it like the religion had put up all these walls around my ex on what is and is not acceptable. With them healing from the religious trauma, they're trying to decide which wall to break down. Inversely, I was trying to set boundaries and speak up for myself more. From my ex perspective, it probably felt too restrictive, like I was putting up another wall for them. From my perspective, it felt like my wants, needs from a relationship didn't matter anymore. So many times in that relationship, I just wanted to feel seen and heard. And each time they rejected that, the more inward I went. That just pissed them off more and made them feel alone in the relationship. Over the course of the 3 years, we kept flip-flopping in our behaviors. In the beginning, I was emotionally closed off. They wanted more emotional vulnerability. So I went to therapy and pushed myself to be more open, only for it to be too much for my ex. Then my ex fell into a deep depressive hole. I stood by them through all of it. I did shrink myself again because I didn't want to be too much for my ex. I felt like the relationship was never the same again after they got into that depressive hole. I remember all of the blank stares they would have at me whenever I opened up emotionally. I was literally crying my eyes out, and they just stood there empty. I held back a lot each time that happened. Towards the end, it felt like we were just trying to survive. I didn't know where their head was at. It didn't feel like they wanted to be in the relationship anymore. They were also so angry at me all of the time, and I felt angry at them many times too. They always complimented friends' family on qualities like loyalty, kindness, and generosity. However, I rarely heard them saying any of those things to me because they felt guilty. That one put a big dent in me. They couldn't put their ego aside. I chose them many times, and it almost always failed me towards the end. I don't know if I can ever speak to them again. I just feel so used. Story 65. It wasn't strong enough to survive the pandemic, not to mention the base incompatibility. Sorry, watching movies with The Rock is not on my bingo card, and I feel like 5 or 6 in the order. Maybe I judged a little about the pack of energy crystals in the bra. Story 66. Claimed she was ready for a relationship after her prior 6-year relationship had ended a few months prior. Strung me along for 4 months before finally being ready to make it official. Then 2 weeks later, got a text from a different ex. Few days later, a sudden spike in anxiety had her feeling like she couldn't be in a relationship was all she would tell me. Seemed totally reasonable. Story 67. Moved in together and realized we weren't compatible and dislike each other's company. Her narcissism turned me to adult beverage, and I'd stay in bars and go home with a different girl every night. Eventually, she threw me out, baby-trapped the guy she moved into our house within a week of me moving out, and got married within a year in a shotgun wedding. I'm glad to see the back of her. Story 68. My ex-boyfriend was a manipulative, abusive, narcissistic pause that used his boyish, every mother's dream act to charm his way to get what he wanted. It was scripted, which he learned from his father. I started seeing signs after a big fight. He was moving too fast. I wanted to slow down a bit. He kept pushing. I tried talking to him. He'd get defensive, then it got physical. So I spoke to his mom. His mom was shocked when she learned from his brother that their dad was coaching him, and the same attitude and destructive behavior was one of the reasons why she divorced his father. The ex went to therapy and even manipulated through that. It wasn't until I left, and with his mom's help, she had to literally show him the photos, which were sealed by the courts, of what his dad did to her, that he was heading down the same path. He was made to live with his aunt in Manitoba and get help, and I moved on. I still from time to time speak to the ex's mother. She was always nice to me, even though her so treated me badly. She never forgave him for being abusive. 2 years later, I met my husband, and he knows what happened. We've been married 31.5 years later, and I have 5 kids, 30, 27, 22, 13, and 11. Story 69. A number of things. He stopped putting in effort, started drinking more, and was really mean to me when he was tipsy. He would flirt with girls in front of me. He made me cry on my birthday. I was losing sleep, hair, and my appetite. When I was out of state for a wedding, he was flirting with his roommate's girlfriend's roommate. My final straw was him texting another girl behind my back, and even then I still tried to work things out. He just simply did not care about me. Story 70. 4-year relationship, and we had a kid. What I did wasn't enough, so she fudged 2 dudes 3 weeks before Christmas and manipulated one of them to jump me. His recovery was about 6 months with a feeding tube because I lost control, especially because I was called a terrible father by his dumbass. Story 71. We got into a lot of fights over money, then we went on a break. On the break, I made plans to go out with a friend. She eventually told me she sucked some guy's male body part in the back of a gym after 2 months of her not wanting to have intimacy with me. For some reason, I was the bad guy when we very shortly got back together. Story 72. She was smart, generous, kind, caring, passionate, and serious. Really everything you could want in a woman. I realized I had trust issues and couldn't be what she wanted, so I broke up with her. We're still friends. She is dating someone else. It's going well and is really happy, and I'm glad she's doing well. Story 73. Because she had a disability, not ableist, and that made her be a male body part to my friends. She stole my best friend's glasses and even got into a fight with him. Eventually, I learned she cheated on me with somebody a whole 3 grades above ours. We were freshmen. She cheated with a senior. Story 74. Every time I did something nice for her, she had some backhanded comment. I'm a pretty peaceful guy. This girl ran into problems, out of her control, and I would go and help her, but I felt that she was not reciprocating. Honestly, would rather be alone and be peaceful, sipping my tea and read my book than deal with what I felt was a one-sided relationship. Story 75. Other than cheating and wasting my money, she had a thing for bad guys on motorcycles. She only wanted her way, and whenever she didn't get it, she would threaten me and causing herself damage. I lasted only till she decided she didn't want to be with me anymore. I felt a relief, but at the same time worried because I didn't know what she was going to do without me. After that, she started spreading out to her FB friends that she lived a horrible relationship with me, etc. Long story short, she's a single mom living with her mom and stepdad, and the guy she cheated on me with won't care for her and won't work so she can claim child support, LOL. Oh, and she's known for being a fake, horrible, fake person after her last 2 relationships ending in her getting arrested. I've caught some fake FB profiles linking back to her, and I just add them on purpose, posting what a great time I'm having, and then block them. Story 76. 1. Poor communication. When we had a disagreement, she was unable to discuss and resolve. She just shut down or relented, neither of which I could tolerate long term. 2. Her mother and twin sisters were miserable cunts, and she would never stick up for me when they attacked, always unjustifiably. Also not tolerable long term. I guess both of the above boil down to conflict avoidance. Story 77. She only felt comfortable seeing me up to 15 minutes a day, 30 minutes on a good day. Mega avoidant, unfortunately, but outside of a few attachment issues, a good person, good partner, and I loved her a lot. The honeymoon was fantastic. In the first 3-ish years, I enjoyed the relationship with her a lot, despite the constant emotional distancing. I always hoped it would get better, but it was so confusing and painful in the end that I got fed up. I told her I need more. She deactivated and ended things after 5.5 years. We didn't live together, never slept over, or spent a whole evening together. I'm pretty secure, so I was very flexible, but this was just too much. Story 78. The last relationship I would consider serious ended because he had severe alcoholism and untreated mental illness. I had told him if he didn't stay honest with me about what was going on, I couldn't continue the relationship. I wasn't even asking him to stop or fix it himself, just to not leave me in the dark. 2 weeks after I told him that, he got caught drinking at work and had been struggling with tragic end ideation. I went with him to the behavioral health center in the ambulance with him, but that was where I drew the line. He needed so much more help than I could provide. That one really hurt. I didn't want to accept that my best friend evolved into this over time, and it took me longer than I would have liked to leave him because I kept hoping he'd wake up. I still think about him on occasion and hope he's alive. Story 79. Number 1 reason is them not treating their significant mental health condition. Because of that, it created a domino effect of numerous things, including, most likely, losing respect, trust, and love for me, not being able to focus on anything but themselves and what they wanted. They emotionally and mentally manipulated me on numerous things on a both small and big scale, which I didn't even know was happening until after relationship was done and went to therapy for. During our final months, we worked opposite job schedules and barely saw each other. And on top of that, the job they had was awful to them, overworked them, and because of that, they were in a mostly negative mood whenever they weren't at work. Combine that with them not taking the wire end of themselves for both their mental and physical health, and our relationship and life hit a boiling point, imploded, and ended in the matter of days. In all, there were a lot of reasons we didn't work out. Hindsight, we should have parted ways months before all these events happened. And I'm not saying I didn't do any wrong by any means. I'm human. I make mistakes. I will continue to make mistakes. But I always strive to be the best person I can for both myself and my relationship. But with the cards I had during my final months with this person, I did everything I possibly could to make it work. At that point, the other person really had no interest in putting in any effort to make our relationship strong again, and it takes 2 people fully invested to make a relationship work. Very happy to say I'm in a much better place now with an absolutely amazing partner that I feel loved, cared for, and cherished every time we're together. I'm very happy and fortunate to be with my current partner. Story 80. He forced me into it. I told him I wasn't ready for or interested in a relationship, and he harassed me until I agreed to date him. He wanted me desperately to have his kids, even after I told him explicitly I was not interested in that ever. He moved way too quickly for how little we knew each other. He was jealous, insecure, obsessive, constantly picking fights, had miles of unresolved issues that he wouldn't address, and was unable to take accountability for quite literally anything. Every fight we ever had, he started. We were together for 2 months and we're both 23, BTW. Story 81. Not compatible. Current is very compatible, but different stages in life. I don't like being 9 years older than him. And unresolved trauma, too much damage, etc. Love is a choice, but I have a personality disorder and do not want to cause more harm than good. Story 82. was found. He never communicated with me when he was upset about things. He stopped trying. He told me he didn't love me romantically. We were supposed to move to his home city, and he didn't even commit to looking for an apartment while we would be staying with his parents. He broke up with me twice before over lots of little things, which, when pressed an example given, was a rude comment I'd made about a Pokemon he grew up playing with. He never planned dates for me or went out of the way to make me feel special. He constantly had a bad gut feeling about us. Everything had to be about him and his feelings, due to being anxious about our relationship all the time, which became suffocating. For the preservation of my last bit of self-respect, I dumped him on Sunday. I'm devastated right now, but this probably won't be the hardest thing ever to get over. Writing this all out just highlights how laughably awful a partner he was. Story 83. I wasn't the same race as his family and was always an outsider. I even went to Catholic Mass for 2 years to appease his mom, and it still wasn't enough. I'm so glad that relationship didn't work out, because now I'm happily married and can be my full authentic self with my soulmate. Story 84. He couldn't handle conflict very well and often attacked me in retaliation. I think he felt like he could never do anything right, which wasn't true. He did a lot right, or I wouldn't have stayed with him. He was, still is, a very kind, interesting person. I wanted to hang out with him forever. But things that should presumably be 5 minutes conversations would turn into huge arguments. One of our first conflicts had to do with him signing me up for something without asking me. I told him, thinking that this would be a 2-minute convo, that I was fine to do it this time. Just next time, please ask me first before you sign me up for something. The way he handled that simple request should have been my sign to get out, because suddenly I was the worst person ever. His favorite thing to do was infer that I was a bad person, or that I didn't care about him. I definitely didn't always word or handle things correctly, and there's a lot of things I'd do differently if given the opportunity. But being called a bad person for wanting things like basic communication eliminate any chance of us making it. It sucks. I still love him. I still miss him. But even if he did show up again, I doubt things would change, because he also lacked accountability. It just sucks. Story 85. Massive avoidant tendencies. I confronted her about it, and she said she'd try to get better and get help. Always felt like I was asking for the bare minimum and getting breadcrumbs. The most jarring thing is going from an extremely clingy girlfriend to basically a non-existent one. The whiplash was crazy to me. I decided to end things when another plan for a date I had ended up with, her telling me she wasn't feeling it 5 hours after the planned time. I know she didn't cheat on me because she really just had no friends, but man, it was such a frustrating experience. Story 86. I said something in a way that came off far worse than what I intended to say. She claimed to forgive me, but apparently did not. I then watched her kiss another guy when she thought I wasn't watching. I then took it at face value when she said, "Let's be friends." I had to block her when she called me a fudge meanie. She was also borderline alcoholic. I wasn't perfect either. I'll admit that readily. I now have several new red flags and a better idea of what I shouldn't be doing in a relationship either. We live and learn. Story 87. He was an avoidant. Though he gave me reassurances that he is a very safe person, I don't get attached easily. He started saying, "I am a very affectionate person. You seem the opposite." I started giving him attention and love. And he pulled out. The end. Story 88. Living with each other. Incredible for the first 9 years in separate homes. Downhill within months of cohabitating. Never argued before moving in. Then it was all the insignificant arguments creating distance. Within 1.5 years of living together, we were done. I recommended we go back to separate living and keep being together. She said she could not go backwards. Seemed like a poorly thought out rape song since we were so happy in that situation. Story 89. We just weren't that into each other. I remember going out with her family to breakfast and thinking, this sucks. Then she came to meet my family and they all told me that she sucked. Great person, just a horrible match for me long term. We both found new people, started families, and are doing great without any hard feelings. Sometimes the magic just isn't there. Story 90. Never made it to his top 10 priorities. Constantly having to chase him for calls, dates, quality time. Got so draining. He is excessively social and I'd always have to wait for his breadcrumbs. I was planning most dates, going to him mostly. Dissolved in his world, really. Story 91. Multitude of reasons. We were no longer able to have healthy communication, nothing but fighting all the time, and my ex-wife was always so mean and cruel whenever she was angry. Things got physical one drunken night, and we tried to save the marriage, but it truly ended that night. No coming back after that. We both agreed to quit drinking to save our marriage, but then she gave up and decided to start sleeping with other people without telling me. She would always deny it, but then one time I did catch her cheating, and I knew for a fact then that she did cheat on me. She always talked about how loyal she was and how hurt she was whenever all of her past serious relationships, they all cheated on her. Made me question everything after that. I didn't believe her anymore. All trust was gone after that, and our marriage ended. I was too hurt, and I no longer wanted to build a life with her. Tried to still be friends, and it was fine at first, but then it also turned toxic. I wish her well, but I don't ever want to talk with her again after all we have been through. Maybe when we are both at better spots in life, we can try a friendship again, since I do care about the kids. I was her boyfriend, and then stepdad to the kiddos for 3 years and some change. She told me that the kids didn't want a relationship with me, though. Story 92. I was in love with someone who was mentally ill and emotionally abusive. I did everything in my power to make her life easier because of her depression, and all she did was resent me for it. She said that I was such a good person and partners that it made her feel like a bad person, and it contributed to her depression. I also believed in her so much that over time I stopped believing in myself. Instead, I started to believe all the things she was saying. That I'm too nice, too helpful, too loving, and that was too much pressure for her. I stopped expecting my needs to be met and instead expected her to disappoint me every chance there was. It was the saddest and most destructive cycle I've ever been in. I never thought I would be in a relationship like that, but that love bombing in the beginning really stuck with me. I spent the last 2 years of our relationship chasing that big love from her when it never actually existed. Story 93. We were each other's first relationship. He love-bombed me and barely owned a nice shirt. Our first date was at his parents' house watching anime and eating oven-made pizza. He bragged about being a good cook. He never listened and was far too casual, blamed it on me every time I tried to tell him I wanted more serious conversations. Story 94. Poor communication, broken trust on both sides, unspoken unhappiness on both sides until she mentioned hers. And she started resenting me after a bit, and she showed it, left me for a new guy. Once she had the chance, broke up with me out of respect, I guess, after finally feeling guilty enough while she was cheating on me already. Story 95. We were both very confused about what we wanted. I didn't realize I was asexual, aromantic. That shoot was a lot more confusing to figure out in the 90s, without handy labels and explanations already worked out and posted all over the internet. She wouldn't admit to herself that she was in love with someone else before she even met me. Bad times all around. Story 96. At first, I told myself that we were just not meant to be. Two awkward teens meeting freshman year of high school. We were great friends and immediately felt chemistry together. But every time we got together, to the literal cliché cheers of our friend group, who all knew we liked each other, it was like the chemistry died. Immediately, we'd go from laughing and cheesy blushing to just awkward silence. Still blushing, still nervous, but all the good parts of a relationship would disappear. We agreed shortly after to break up, and almost immediately chemistry was back. We were laughing constantly, excitedly telling each other plans or things we heard or talking about our giles. All this stuff you'd expect from a relationship. So much so that we would convince ourselves to try again. And back to square one, where we immediately clam up. I think in part it was because we were both naive about what it meant to be in a relationship. At the time, I was heavily abused at home, so I constantly had a guard up about what I could and couldn't open up about. And I certainly couldn't hang out outside of school or have friends over, much less acknowledge I was dating and have a boyfriend over. And you can imagine how sheltered I was in regards to intimacy. Not that we had any business doing anything too crazy at this stage of our lives, but that's to say I had no idea what made a girlfriend, or vice versa, what to expect from a boyfriend. Other than that, he and I just failed to keep any spark when the pressure of being in a relationship came on. Like, not to diss him, but at the time he had braces that he didn't clean properly, so I was never tempted to even try, going beyond a peck on the lips. So most of our intimacy was holding hands as we walked to our respective classes if they were close by or the same as each other. I thought we ended things mutually the last time we gave it a try. Though I knew he had apparently expressed hopes of trying again to mutual friends, I had decided if it hadn't worked through years of trying, it just wasn't meant to be. I loved him, but as a friend, and I wanted us to just be that. Really good friends. So I moved on and developed a crush on my now husband. And he got a bit distant, but I thought we still had a good chance to be friends when he started expressing interest in one of our mutual friends, though he denied it at the time.